Hey, Daniel from GrowingMusicStudio.com, and in this video I want to talk about 5 weaknesses that I've discovered in group lessons. Today I thought I would start answering what are the weaknesses of doing group lessons. Now, as many people know, I've been doing group lessons for 10 years. I've helped over 150 studios convert to group lessons over the last couple of years. I'm running a training workshop on how to do successful group lessons. And for me to start right out with this idea of what are the weaknesses, let's just be really honest about them. I think it is an honest way to address some of the concerns I think that people have, legitimate concerns that people have about doing group lessons. I wouldn't want anyone to do a format that they didn't want to do. I wouldn't want anyone to jump into something not knowing what the weaknesses might be. So today I want to address 5 of them that I have identified and then give an honest look at why those weaknesses might actually be strengths. And this isn't some backdoor way of trying to minimize those weaknesses. There are legitimate weaknesses, but from a certain frame, from a certain point of view, they don't have to be. And so I'm going to just jump right into them. These are 5 weaknesses I have personally identified. Let's go with an easy one. Number 1, startup costs. There are costs involved with starting a group lesson studio. For me, at the very beginning, I knew that I wanted to see 4 kids at a time. I went out and I bought 4 digital pianos, and that put me back several $1,000s to do that. These were good digital pianos. You know, they were touch sensitive and all those things that you'd want. But at the end of the day, I put that on my business credit card, and it paid me back over time. You know, I'm not going to minimize that either. I'm not going to minimize the truth. It definitely paid me back over time. But at the beginning, when I didn't know if it was going to work or not, it did seem a little bit scary to go invest in all those. But for me, it was an investment in my future. I was going to make this work no matter what. And kind of with that attitude, I knew that I would do everything in my power to absolutely do that. And I also knew, you know, I went on Craigslist. I went on the local classifieds. I saw people selling digital pianos, so I knew that I could get some money back if it didn't end up working out. But still, it was a risk. Now, here is one benefit. And again, I'm not trying to minimize this particular weakness. There are startup costs, all right? I'm not hiding that fact. There is something that is a little bit different than when I started this back in 2008, and that is the price of digital equipment has gone down significantly. Pianos that used to cost $4,000 or $5,000 now run in the $2,000 range. Pianos that used to run $1,500 now are in the $1,000. Pianos that used to run $1,200 are now in the $600 to $800 range. It is less expensive than it was 10 years ago to start up. I've had many studios that have worked with me start up for honestly with what you can make with this format. I've had people start up with very small startup costs, relatively speaking. So that's the first one. That's the first weakness. There are startup costs involved, and you do need to understand that going into it. Second weakness, there is a learning curve on the front end. And what I mean is that it's the rare person that was taught in music school or in their piano pedagogy courses. It was the rare person that was taught how to teach group. Now, I had a group program that I had to run in my internship for my education degree, for my music education degree. That we did have that format, but it wasn't of the highest quality. It really was more for younger kids, and it almost was music appreciation. They weren't teaching hard skills. They weren't teaching sight reading. They weren't teaching, you know, those foundational theory concepts that needed to be happening for a kid to kind of grow up into an actually fully functioning musician. So I did have a little bit of that experience within my own college career, my own university career, but most of us aren't taught that. And so what that means is that we are learning on the job when we decide to switch over. Now, of course, we carry our skills from our one-on-one experience. Of course we do. But there are things that are just vastly different from teaching one-on-one. One of them is the time consideration, that time element. That could almost be seen as a weakness in itself, but I think it could be subsumed under this one, this idea that there's a learning curve in the front end. There's the time element. There's the fact that you have to be far more efficient in how you speak, how you teach. It does demand that you make a change in how you do things. I'll give you a perfect example. I used to teach quarter notes the way Faber taught them. I turned the page from 13 to 14 in the Faber primer book. Of course, I'm thinking of the second edition when I was still teaching one-on-one. That would have been the first edition, so I don't know what that number was anymore. That's been a long time ago. but I would turn the page from page 13 to page 14 when they introduce quarter notes, and I would, we'd read the definition, I'd explain what it was, we'd do some clapping, we'd talk about, rhythm counts and these sorts of things. I'd have them draw quarter notes, I might get flashcards out. I do all these things. I thought those were musically beneficial things. I thought those were educationally beneficial things. In a group lesson, you just cannot do that. You do not have all this time to spend on that sort of thing. Now, you might think to yourself, oh man, do I really want to do this then if I can't do all these educationally valuable things? But the question I had to ask myself, and this is why it's a weakness, this is why it's a challenge. It could be better labeled a challenge than a weakness, but this is why it is a challenge or a weakness, is that you have to be very, very honest about what is actually educationally necessary. There's a difference between educational usefulness and educational necessariness. Is that a word? I'm not sure if it is. Someone write in the comments if that's a word or not. But is it useful or is it necessary? Those are two very different answers. And what happened with me is I began to get a lot more pragmatic with my speech. I became a lot more efficient in my speech. And I began to ask myself, what is the minimum I can do to have a child be able to do the same thing that they could 5 years ago or 2 years ago when I was teaching one-on-one and I had all the time in the world, it felt like, to teach what a quarter note was. What's the end result? Oh, I want that child to play steady. What is absolutely necessary to get that child to play steady? And what began happening for me in not only quarter notes, but in a lot of different topics that we touch on in those beginning years, of the method books, what I began to realize is that every concept I taught could be reduced, could be more efficient. I could be a little less creatively lazy and find more efficient ways to explain it. And so the way I teach quarter notes now, and of course this is based on what came before it, I don't think one would just be able to do this, and I'm going to explain what it is. I think you'd kind of have to know exactly how I did the entire intro lesson and what I did prior to that point. But I literally just turn the page now, have them draw those notes for me so that they have a tactile sense of what they are. There's some value there that you definitely want to capture. I will have them draw them, and I will demonstrate them and then just set them loose in that next song. And because of the way I've set up their sight reading skills prior to that point, it actually works for them. They understand how to feel the quarter note, not how to academically understand the quarter note. And then once they understand how to feel it, then the academic backfilling comes in. And then we can do things in theory to kind of fill that out. But I used to spend 5-10 minutes teaching quarter notes, and now I can do it in less than 30 seconds and still get the same result. So again, going back to what the weakness is that this format does demand that you make changes. No matter if you do it my way or if you do it a different way, there are changes you have to make. And I think some teachers could perceive that as a weakness if they're really attached to the way that they do things. If they're not just attached to an outcome, but they're attached to a specific way of doing things, that could be a weakness for some teachers. Anyway, that's the second one. Third weakness, and this one's very real. Non-traditional students might not fit in this format, and I have several stories for this. I was teaching my group lesson program, and at the beginning, I only was doing a few groups. Most of my students I was still seeing one-on-one. I would not and could not see preschoolers in that format, at least not the way that I was teaching. My way of teaching, and this is in no way a backdoor compliment or me patting myself in the back, you'll understand why I'm saying this. My way of teaching was very rigorous and is very rigorous. Even in group lessons, I'm prepping kids for achievement exams. This is something I'm very clear on. If I wanted to see preschoolers, I probably would need to get some of these group programs for preschoolers that are licensed, like Kinder Music and Music Together and these sorts of things, where you're seeing kids in a group and you're doing musically valuable things, but it's just not rigorous. It's not prepping them for something as rigorous as an exam experience. And there's nothing wrong with those programs, just it's a very different way from the way that I'm doing things. So there's no way that I could see preschoolers. And at the time, I was sometimes even uncomfortable having as old as 6 in the groups. Now, as I got better at it, as I got better at addressing some of those other weaknesses I mentioned before, like the efficiency of speech and the efficiency of teaching, that went down a little bit. That went down. That age went to 6 and then to 5. And then I would even sometimes accept 4-year-olds and if I knew that their attention span could handle that type of lesson and the length of the time that we were together in the group. Which kind of leads me to another non-traditional student that doesn't fit. kids with learning difficulties, kids that don't pay attention, that won't be self-directing for whatever reason, whether it's a medical reason or it's just a motivation reason, those kids really don't fit in the group environment. The group environment does demand some independence from the child and the ability to be self-directing. Now, there's ways that I handle kids, and there's ways that I encourage and teach kids to behave in the group that allows them to be, more responsible. And it's interesting. I'll have a kid come in that's a little bit of a wild card, and usually within a few lessons, I've got them calmed down and they're just doing the work. It's a really cool thing to see. But some of the worst cases of kids who just don't want to be there, their parents are forcing them there, and who tend to be disruptive, that won't be the best environment for them. And then you have a choice to make. Are you going to continue seeing that type of student one-on-one as like a separate program for your group program, or are you going to be a group-only studio and you just can't serve that child? And I think that's a decision that has to be left up to the teacher. I think that each teacher has to make that choice for themselves. I certainly would never, impose my will on another teacher or assume that my opinion's the best. But that is a choice that has to be made. And again, with the many, many studios that I've helped convert to group lessons, there are some that choose to go group only, and they have a referral network where they'll refer those non-traditional students to another teacher that they really trust or that sees that kind of student, or they will do a hybrid model where they will do maybe, let's say, 80% group lessons, but then they still have kind of a legacy one-on-one program where they can meet those kinds of students. So that's the third weakness. Non-traditional students don't often fit into a group environment because the group environment demands a level of kind of peace and calm that must be there, and sometimes those students just aren't a good fit for that, and then you have to make a choice. So that's the third one. Fourth out of fifth weakness that I want to address in this video, and that is simply, and I was kind of touching on this before, but it requires you to be better at communication and marketing. One of the fears that many teachers have is how are they going to get their families on board? So if they already have an established studio, how am I going to get my families on board? I think this was really well demonstrated with one of my early clients that I helped convert to group. His name was John. He was in a college town. I wrote a case study on him. After this video is over, I might go ahead and post that link here. But he lived in a college town and had gone to that college. And after he'd left that college, he started his own studio. He had a few people working for him. He was up to, I think, 64 or 65 students. And he was teaching many children of the music faculty at this college he had just gone to, where they had enrolled their kids with him. And he had real concerns. These aren't just average suburban parents who don't know, a fermata from a treble clef. These are highly trained musicians that have high standards for the education of their children. And his big concern was, how are we going to get these college professors to convert their kids over in this program? And so, and I don't want to get too deep into this here, but we worked on a communication strategy and how to message to the parents, these professors, exactly how they could do this. And as it turns out, and I detail this in the case study, 21 days later, he had converted all 64 of his students, or 65, whatever that number was. He had converted all of those students within 21 or 23 days, all of them to group lessons because of that marketing. Now, here's the point. That fear is well-founded because there are many people who've tried to convert to group lessons and they were met with a resounding no. It was a total rejection from their families. And what that shows is that you cannot do this in a haphazard way. You can't just do this in a way that might just seem natural. There does need to be a strategy. And when I say natural, I mean the first thought that comes to your head. Maybe just sending out an email saying, hey, I'm thinking of starting a group program. Who wants to join? It's probably not going to work. I'm just being honest. That is a weakness. That this does require more intentionality. It requires a little more forethought. It requires a degree of preparation that isn't there for the already established category of one-on-one lessons. Everyone knows that one-on-one lessons is just the best way, right? That we don't have to convince parents on that. It's built into the mentality already. So if we want to do something that's outside the norm, we actually have to show the value of that. And that could be considered a weakness if it's something that a teacher doesn't want to do. I'm not going to go any farther on that one. Going to jump to the fifth and final weakness here, and then the hidden strength behind all of these, and then we'll be done for the day. And so the fifth one is, it might require you to change your policies and procedures in your studio and how you, quote unquote, do things. And I touched on this just briefly before, so maybe I won't spend much time here. But if you are committed to an outcome, a certain level of quality, a certain level of engagement from the student, maybe you measure, and I'm not even trying to be cheesy here, but maybe you measure the success of your lessons in smiles, or how many or how many songs a student passes in a single lesson. If you have an outward measurement that you're looking for, and that's what you're committed to, then maybe making a format change won't be a big deal. But if you're committed to a certain way of doing things, you might find this very, very troublesome. And the other portion of this is you might have to submit to a process in and of yourself. A great business is built on process and reproducibility and doing the same thing in a systematic, organized fashion. And if you're taking preschoolers and adults and non-traditional students, and I'll do a little homeschool in the day, and I'll do this, and I'm going to teach 3 different instruments, you're going in a lot of different directions. And so you might need to focus in on one particular thing and get really, really good at that so that you don't have this plurality of lesson types and discipline types. Now, if you're a huge studio with 300 students, feel free to ignore that piece of advice. But if you're a small studio, you have 30 students, you're teaching 3 disciplines, you're seeing preschoolers, adults, grade schoolers, high schoolers, college students, you have this type of program, you're doing 8 different methods, you might need to rein that in. And that could be considered a weakness for some teachers, because to do a group lesson program the way that I do it, where I've seen 90 to 100 kids a week for a very, very long time, and had one method, one type of student that I saw it made it so much easier for me to get good at that method very quickly, because I was doing the same thing over and over and over again in every single lesson and practicing the same skill, working with grade schoolers and high schoolers in one very specific method book, in one very specific way of teaching group. If you're teaching all kinds of different students and you're going in a dozen different directions, it's going to be difficult. And so some teachers might perceive that as a weakness because they do enjoy that variety. Or maybe they're doing that variety as out of necessity because they're not sure how to market in such a way that they can get that very specific type of student. And so it could be a weakness because they're thinking, oh man, how am I going to do that? So those are the 5 weaknesses. I'll just briefly run over them again because I've seen a lot more people have joined on here at the very end. Startup costs, that's a potential weakness. Learning curve on the front end. It's not how we were taught in university, more than likely. 3, non-traditional students might not fit in this format very well. Number 4, it requires you to up your game in communication and marketing and to be far more intentional and not do things haphazardly. And then 5th, it might require a change in the way that you teach, a change in the way that you do things, a change in the way that you do your policies and procedures. Now, the hidden strength behind all 5 of these weaknesses. They're strengths in disguise, and there's a couple reasons why. First off, they're an actual barrier to entry. There might be people watching this video right now that you hear some of these and you're like, ooh, that's icky. I don't want to do that. I don't know if I want to spend that much money on the front end for equipment when there's no guarantee that this is going to work or that people will join. That's actually a barrier to entry. There are other people who aren't willing to do that. So it's a strength for you because if you actually choose to do that, you're becoming one of those people who will actually go to the links to make a program that's actually worth enrolling in. Okay, we're not talking about some frou-frou program that's basically a music appreciation class in disguise. No, I'm talking about a group program that can actually deliver serious results for kids. If there are other studios out there, and if there are other studios out there who are not willing to go to the links necessary to create a good program, that means if you do, you will be unique. And so when I talk about the fact that for the last couple of years, I made $150 an hour teaching music in the Midwest, where typically the average teacher makes $35 to $45 an hour, it's on the back of that reality, is that they're not willing to take those extra steps. They're not willing to look past those weaknesses and see that they're actually strengths. They're barriers to entry to people. Next, these are actually mean that you are giving more value to people. And what I mean by that is, if you are willing to overcome those communication issues, if you're willing to be more intentional in how you communicate the value of what you're doing, if you're intentional in being more efficient in the way that you teach music, and can actually deliver a result for a child in a shorter period of time, you are actually being more valuable to your client. When you are valuable to your client, they will never fire you. If you want to talk about the secret of retention, stop the tactics, and there's a lot of them out there. A lot of people teach them, and there's nothing wrong with them. But if you truly want to retain people for a long, long time, demonstrate the value of what it is that you're doing for them. And teaching in a group program is like going to the gym. And I don't mean this with any sense of hilarity, with no sense of exaggeration. It really is going to the gym for your teaching career. It is causing you to be less flabby in the way that you speak and communicate. I got so much more efficient, so much more intentional with how I spoke to children. When I didn't believe, oh, I've just got all the time in the world. When I became aware of the time constraints, and that's what group did for me, is they put time constraints on me. When I became aware of those, I began to learn how to get results out of kids without having to say so much. And that might seem like a small thing, but it is a valuable thing, because what it does is it lends to a non-confusing learning environment for the child. It delivers results for the student, and the parent sees that. It's more valuable inherently, and that's why that weakness can actually be a strength, or these weaknesses can actually be a strength. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm very passionate about this. I really believe in this. I've seen it in my own career. And so just maybe an afterthought to that is, these are real skill barriers. You will build more skill if you teach in a group lesson program. You will build a different set of skills. You've got a certain set of skills in teaching one-on-one. You'll get a different set of skills in teaching group, and that makes you more valuable. The more skills you stack on top of your base skill set that you have now, the more valuable you become, either to other people or to yourself or to both. The fact that I had played piano since I was 4 and went to college and got a degree, that was adding a skill. The fact that I got a music education degree added a skill on top of that. But when I added the skill of marketing on top of the skill of being able to teach well, it blew up my results, to the point that I get so many requests for lessons in any given month that I couldn't possibly take them. Although there are teachers around me love me because I'm essentially advertising for them. I get lots of requests and I send them to the teachers around me. They don't even try to compete with me on advertising. In a way, I think they know they can't beat me, but they also don't need to. I just send them the people who come to me that I can't see, which is kind of funny. My point is that when you start adding skills on top of what you already do well, it just makes you much more valuable to yourself. And again, this is why you can start overcoming these skill barriers, is why you can make the kind of money that folks who teach group lessons. Some of my clients that are in major urban areas are making $250 an hour, $300 an hour teaching group, simply because it costs more, in places like New York and Seattle and LA and that sort of thing. So, final thought here: you have a choice. We all have a choice. Are you going to look at the weaknesses as insurmountable obstacles, or will you differentiate yourself as a competitor, take the plunge, and do what others are afraid to do? Because that is the hidden strength. These weaknesses are all weaknesses, but if you can answer those questions for yourself, if you commit to some of these skills, if you commit to being intentional about how you market your group lesson program, if you look at what works in terms of marketing, then you're doing what others are afraid to do, and you will have a career that others will not be able to have, simply because you address these things. So I really think it is a framing issue. Are these weaknesses, or are these actually hidden strengths in disguise, things that keep people from jumping into a group lesson program? If you actually do them, over the long run, you'll have a different studio. For me, it was a much, much better studio, a much more enjoyable and engaging studio. I no longer got bored teaching primer level students, and many different things I'm going to cover over the coming month. So I will see you. Have a good day.